Okay, so we're going to continue with looking at depth in our digital painting techniques. And we've gone over linear perspective, which is one of the primary ways in which we can convey a realistic sense of depth. But the other way that we can do this is through what's called atmospheric perspective. Now, this seems pretty intuitive and really self-evident when we go through it, but there are some major points to think about when looking at and looking for atmospheric perspective. So there's four things that you should know here when trying to create depth through using this technique, atmospheric perspective. So first is that the quality of the atmosphere, right? The atmosphere is made up of water particles and other gases. So things like haze, humidity, fog, pollution, rain, etc., will change the way the objects and environment appear to us as they move further away, right? And again, this seems really self-evident, but here are the ways in which that happens. So here's just a few examples of just some photographs that show this in action, right? So here we have the quality of the atmosphere. We have some clouds and some fog, and we can see what that does to the atmosphere, or sorry, what that does to the environment, right? And here we are as well too. Here's some other weather that would be showing some atmospheric perspective. Okay? So what this does, what the atmosphere does, is that things will appear more blue and gray in color as they get further away from us. We've all seen this, right? If you've ever looked at any landscape photographs or actually been out in the world, you can see that as things are far away from you, they get more blue and gray in color. And here's some examples, right? So here's some really saturated, colorful photos, but we can see, we know that these mountains in the background, we know they're not actually blue or gray, right? They're probably reddish brown and orange and green like we see here in the foreground, but again, due to the atmosphere, here's another example, right? Due to the atmosphere, right, all that greenery that we know is there, right, it becomes blue and gray as it moves further back. Right? Here's a painting now, and we can see in that little opening behind her head, right, we see the rocks are brown and, right, different shades of green, but right, those mountains in the background look blue and gray. Okay, so the atmosphere will also cause things to get blurry, right? So as things are further away from us, things are going to be less distinct and more blurry. This is just due to the nature of how we see as well. Obviously, we don't see the backgrounds in crystal clear detail as we would the foreground. And just a couple examples here, we can see that these trees are becoming less distinct, right? They're not as defined, they're not as sharp as what we see in the foreground. Okay, and the last thing that you want to look for with atmospheric perspective is that contrast will now fade, right? Our values will flatten out, right? We're not going to have as much contrast between light and dark. So if we look in the foreground and middle ground, we can see the range of value from light to dark, and then we see that as we move further into the background, that gradient becomes narrower and narrower, right? So we're not dealing with such a spectrum of value. So here's another example here, right? We can see on the right side, we see the darks and the highlights, right? The shadows and the light on the right. And then as we move further back, those flatten out and we get kind of that neutral grayish, bluish color, right? We're not having as much contrast. Okay, so just to recap the four things here with atmospheric perspective, right? So the quality of the atmosphere will change the way objects and environments appear to us. Due to the nature of atmosphere, the object and environment will appear more gray and blue, right? The further that they are from us. And as things recede from us, they will naturally appear less distinct and more blurry. And our values will flatten out as things move further away, right? The environment will show less contrast between light and dark as they recede away from us. Okay, so just things to think about as you're building your digital painting project going forward, right? You want to be incorporating what you can with linear and atmospheric perspective. Okay,